Chair, given your committee's oversight role of DIRCO and your specific work in investigating the circumstances around the purchase of this so-called land parcel in New York to the tune of 118 million rand, what's your initial reaction to Minister Naledi Pandor's decision to suspend the current DG Kgabo Mohoai as it relates to this matter?
Sherwin, the Portfolio Committee picked up the announcement from the media reports that the minister has placed the current DG, Mr. Mohoai, under the precautionary suspension as part of implementation of the recommendations of the committee's oversight report on New York. This development came as a surprise because the committee was not aware of the facts relating to the suspension of the current DG, as he did not feature in our oversight reports. While the committee does not wish to interfere in the internal affairs of the department, it is, however, concerning that it had to learn through the media that a particular course of action has been taken, especially when it was said to have been linked to the recommendations of Parliament.
So listen, I'm going to get to your interactions with the department over the course of the last year, certainly since this report was tabled in March 2020. Just take us back, Madam Chair. This matter has its genesis in 2016, then followed by an Auditor General's report 2017-2018 that flagged the awarding of a tender for what was called procurement processes, including design and construction of official and residential accommodation for South Africa's diplomatic missions in New York City. Your committee then undertook an oversight visit to New York in December 2019. What did you find on that trip?
Let me be upfront and start with the latter part of your question. We took an oversight visit to New York because the project was presented to the Portfolio Committee. What we find there is a building, not the land. I must be upfront with that because we were told that it was a purchase of a land, but boom, when we got there, it was a building. The report of the Auditor General clearly showed that irregularities were identified in the awarding of a tender of the procurement of a land for a building suitable and sustainable office and accommodation for the two New York missions. And then the AG report specifically referred to the documentation that showed a trail of sequences that describes the irregularities. One, if I may cite a few, is that approvals, for example, the minutes of 10 May 2016 of the bid adjudication committee showed that the recommendations for the appointment of the service provider was approved by the current CFO of DIRCO, who is a chairperson. The CFO wrote on the 16th May 2016 a letter to the former DG, which is Mr. Matjila, requesting for approval of the appointment of the service providers for the New York project, which he subsequently approved. It then transpired that a year in March 2017, the current DG entered into a legally certified project preparation agreement with the appointed service providers, who by then had become a development partner in terms of the public-private partnership. We're informed that in terms of that agreement, the department would make a pre-payment of 117,720 million, which is rounded to 118 million, towards the initial steps, including the deposits for the land design of the building and what have you.
So let me jump in. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the crux of this matter, Madam Chair, is that 118 million rand was spent on land for future development possibly, but that the ownership of that land is not today with DIRCO, and that the department owns nothing and has nothing to show for the 118 million that it spent. Correct?
You are correct. Because even if you can go there, you won't find a land, you will find a building, and that building is not owned by the department. So to understand the gravity of the matter, Sherwin, let me list for you, and South Africa is watching probably the irregularity identified by the Chief Procurement Officer in the National Treasury on this particular matter, and the Auditor General, which the bids committee and the former DG ignored and went ahead to award and sign off the tender in May 2016. One, the tax clearance submitted with the bid is not in the name of the company which was ultimately awarded the contract. The latest annual financial statements submitted by the winning bidder were not audited as required by the responsive criteria in the tender documents. The company that the bid was awarded to is not the same company which submitted the bidding documents. The company that won the tender failed to disclose that they are in a joint venture with the other bidding on the standard bid documents. Now, the evaluation criteria on functionality by DIRCO in the bid document only provided for the weight but not values, despite these values were used during evaluation processes. So those irregularities were ignored.
So let me jump in here. So let me read from your oversight report. The amount of 118 million rand was noted to have been paid on the basis of a misrepresentation to the department that the real estate agent has bought land to build a suitable and sustainable office building. The supply chain management challenges associated with the New York pilot project are a source of diplomatic embarrassment and pose both representational and reputational risk to the image of the country. Your committee, Madam Chair, has called for investigations by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. What has your interaction been with the department since this report was tabled in March of 2020?
So when we were informed by the department that a court process was underway to set aside the contract as it is irregular so that the money paid can be recovered, to date, we do not know what has happened with the court processes, and the matter was said to be sub judice, and the committee respected that. On the other hand, the department has not even opted to respond to the committee's concerns in that oversight report. Recently, the department reported that it has commenced with the implementation of consequence management in respect of all irregular expenditure, including this one, and would report back to the committee at the appropriate time.
Let me ask you this. What are some of, since you've not been able to pose questions to various members that might have been involved in the procurement process in the Department of International Relations, what are some of the specific questions you continue to have of particular department officials? What are some of the questions you'd like to raise with them? Tell us.
There's a lot of questions that we have, because if you are, for instance, a property management personnel in the department, one, we expect you to have expertise and qualifications. Then we posed questions around the qualifications of certain personnel there, and we requested that we get their qualifications. And until to date, we have not received those qualifications. The ones that we received, they showed the contrary. And that alone put us in a predicament that begins to suggest that the department needs a special attention. And then on the issue of irregular expenditures and accountability, the financial accountability in any department, it lies with the finance personnel. And we have not received that kind of accountability, and there has been no consequence management with that regard. We are still waiting for the department to act on those issues and the questions that we posed to them. But what we got was the precautionary suspension of a person which never approved any a bid which is associated with this particular irregular expenditure of 118 million.
Right. So the DG, right, Kgabo Mohoai, not mentioned in this report, but there are some officials that are mentioned in this report. Your report flags the role of Bryce-Pease Africa, the DIRCO's Chief Director of Property Management, DIRCO's CFO, Kefis Ramashau, for leading this process. It also raises questions about the role of former Ambassador Jerry Matjila to the United Nations, the head of the mission in New York, but also critically the DG that signed off on the beginning of this process in 2016. What would you like to hear from those three individuals?
What we want to hear from those individuals, or from the minister rather, Sherwin, is to report to the committee as to when is she going to execute an investigation on those individuals that are mentioned. When is she going to implement consequence management on those individuals who are mentioned in that particular report? They are implementing a recommendation of the committee, which had no current DG in it in terms of consequence management and the investigations, which we have recommended to the minister. So those individuals must be brought to book and answer whatever questions around this money, and the money must be recouped. That's what we are saying as the portfolio committee, instead of dealing with people who are not even part of our recommendations and leave the ones that are on our recommendations. Because immediately, or few months or few whatever, after this was approved, Mr. Jerry Matjila followed the man to New York because he was the ambassador there. He went there and he became an ambassador. And when we were on the oversight, we thought that we would address this particular issue, but he decided to run away and he was nowhere to be found when we were in New York. So we could not deliberate on this particular matter and engage him as the portfolio committee, because that was our fact-finding, sort of an oversight on the matter of New York, which in fact, he himself is a sender off, but he decided to disappear.
My understanding is you wanted to call that trip off immediately once you landed and discovered that he was not in town to meet you, right?
Who wanted to
the committee? The committee was so furious they wanted to get back on a plane and go back to South Africa because Jerry Matjila, the former DG and current head of mission in New York, was not here to receive you. Is that my understanding?
We felt so undermined, Sherwin, because we had prepared for the oversight for quite a long time and postponed several times. And he knew that we were coming there, and we were coming there to get answers, knowing very well that the report of the Auditor General was explicit and puts him at the center of the whole quagmire and corruption and squandering of monies of government that we see today surfacing in the media a few years down the line.
Madam Chair, final question for you. You have the power to call the minister to account here. She can appear before your committee to testify. There's, of course, this narrative around sub judice and court processes. What does the future hold in terms of implementation of your recommendations and holding this department to account?
We will interact with the minister, Sherwin, because it's part of also oversight and accountability responsibility of the portfolio committee. We will try and get the minister to the portfolio committee so that we interface and discuss this particular matter.
Madam Chair, finally, I know I said finally, but my final question to you. South Africans will be very frustrated when they look at the timeline, right? This was flagged by an Auditor General's report in 2017, 2018. We are now in 2021. Your report came out in March of 2020, tabled in the National Assembly November 2020. Why is this process dragging on for so long? Can it not be sped up to its resolution?
Sherwin, when we got the legacy report, by the way, remember we're a new portfolio because of these 5 years. So we got this from the legacy report. So it has been dragging since. And then when we got it from the legacy report, immediately we invited the AG to come and present to us. And the AG has been consistent and very explicit and had an account chronologically of all the events that unfolded that led to this particular irregular expenditure. And we thought that it's an important matter because we are a country that seeks to achieve a country free of corruption, whether it is at the level of officials or a level of politicians. But we have that responsibility of cleaning corruption in our country, and all these squanderings of monies that we see today unfolding and surfacing before the eyes of society. Then we took this as a priority to say, let's go and follow the recommendations of the AG, because AG is one of our own as well. They speak with authority on matters, and when they recommend and there are findings, ours is to embrace those findings. Then we went to New York. Then when we got there, boom, AG was vindicated. So it dragged so long because there was no attention on this particular matter. So when the report was adopted by Parliament last year in November, through the Office of the Speaker, the report was sent to the department. So this year, we were hoping that we are going to get the responses on what has been done on the recommendations of the portfolio committee, which are very explicit and categorically put and highlighted in our oversight report. And then, boom, we got this, the suspension. Current DG.
Well, we trust that you, Madam Chair, and your committee will continue to hold their feet to the fire. Thank you so very much indeed for speaking with me.
All right, so this is about a purchase in New York for land that basically doesn't exist. And she was talking about the investigation by the parliamentary committee, making some claims against Ambassador Matjila, saying that he wasn't there to greet them, or efforts to reach the former UN Ambassador Matjila on this matter have been unsuccessful, while the spokesperson for the Department of International Relations has not responded to questions on the progress of their internal investigation. SABC News has extended a right of reply to the department, and we are awaiting their response.